In this video, we will be talking about tension issues in a knit stitch before a purl stitch. Some tension issues that can crop up that's fairly common is an enlarged knit stitch before a purl stitch, either in ribbing or in cabling, or in other combinations of knit and purl stitches such as seed stitch or moss stitch. The reason this happens is because the transition from a knit stitch to a purl stitch uses more yarn. There's some excess yarn there that has to, so I'm moving the yarn forward to make a purl. If I don't pull that slack between the stitches, the excess yarn ends up sitting in that leftmost knit stitch right before that purl stitch. And so this is what happens in ribbing and in the final stitch in a cable transitioning to the purl. And it doesn't so much happen on the other side because I've made a purl, I pull the yarn to the back, I'm tensioning the yarn in the back. That already takes that slack away. But when I transition from a knit to a purl, I'm not tensioning that yarn as tightly, and then I'm making a purl, so the excess yarn just kind of sits there. So what can we do to fix this? There's a few ways to try to fix it, and it depends too on how bad this tension issue is for you. One method is to simply, when you get to the transition, is to pull tightly, either before making the purl or form the purl and then pull, and to try to get rid of that slack. Sometimes this is not enough. If that is the case, then there's another trick that you can try. Bring your yarn forward. When you go to make this first purl stitch, instead of wrapping the yarn the usual direction around the needle, wrap it from underneath the needle. This is the opposite from how a purl stitch is usually made. And you can either just do that for that first purl stitch or do that for a couple if you have multiple purl stitches, and then make the other purl stitches normally. Now this wraps the yarn around the needle the opposite way, so the stitch will be mounted opposite from normal. And I will show you how that looks on the other side. So these stitches are mounted correctly, so I will knit them normally. But my two that were the two purl stitches are mounted opposite, so I simply knit them through the back loop to make sure they are not twisted. And now I bring the yarn forward and I will purl opposite. And then that one's mounted correctly, that one's mounted correctly, this one's mounted the opposite, so I will knit through the back loop. So that's another technique for attempting to tighten those transitions up. And this is a swatch where on the same yarn and on the same needles, where I just made a conscious effort to tighten up each of those transitions. And you can see how big of a difference that made. These knit columns are now more evenly sized to each other. Same with the cable stitches. The cables themselves on cable rows aren't terribly stretched out, whereas these are quite stretched out. So those are some tips for attempting to resolve this particular tension issue. Thanks for watching.